As someone from outside the state, we've seen from looking at Texas a fair number of political prosecutions, probably more than I can think of in really any other state. And obviously, most recently with Rick Perry, which is a bogus political prosecution. Before that, Tom DeLay, another case that was thrown out. Of course, K. Bailey Hutchison. I have to believe this may be the worst of any of them. This is a case that is pure political vendetta on the part of politicians in Collin County and Byron Cook in particular. And here's someone that is being sued for fraud that has changed his story already about what he testified about Attorney General Paxton. The case has been dismissed once by a federal judge, completely dismissed, all 4 charges. And when you dismiss a case in a federal court, that means the court has to assume that everything the prosecution is saying is true. And even if it's all true, there's no case. And it was dismissed once, it's been refiled. I'm told that's going to be dismissed also. And yet we have a case going on here in the state of Texas where, again, the prosecution is going forward and irregularities abound, not surprisingly. You have a judge that's ordering attorneys to be paid an outrageous amount of money. Hundreds of thousands of dollars when it's against the law in Texas to do so. And you have a case where there's a limit on attorney's fees that's in the statute, and then a judge says, well, I'm going to ignore that. Why? Because of the person being charged. He didn't ignore it before he found out what the case was. After he found out who the person being charged was, he then sets it aside. Laws are in place to make sure that justice is blind. You don't then ignore the law to ask the taxpayers to pay because of this political prosecution. So I can go on and on about how you see irregularity after irregularity. You see these cases outside of the state of Texas being dismissed, and you see the person who's being paid as the lawyer, who's getting, I think, over $400,000 in fees already, is an unindicted co-conspirator to a drug gang. You can't make this up. And for this case to continue is an outrage. I mean, this case should be dismissed, and the Attorney General should be left to do his job.
You mentioned this is political, and in those previous cases, a lot of those were driven by a democratically controlled judicial system. In this case, it seems like it's Republicans going after Republicans. This is establishment versus the Tea Party. One of the things I found in campaigning in 30-some states across the country, I come from Pennsylvania. It's a very divided political state, Democrats and Republicans, very competitive. We have a lot of swinging back and forth between Democrats and Republicans, and we think it's pretty brutal between Democrats and Republicans. You know what I found out is in states in which one party is sort of the dominant party, the worst battles are inside the party sometimes, and because it's friend against friend sometimes, and it's less ideological than it is personal. And I think that's what's going on here. You've seen not a Republican versus Democrat as you did in the other cases I mentioned, but here it's an internecine battle in Collin County of someone in Ken Paxton who upset the establishment. I mean, he was a Tea Party guy. He was an outsider. He's a conservative. And on the other side of that, as you've seen in the Texas legislature, Byron Cook's part of the cabal that has handed over the leadership to the Democrats and Republicans jointly to take a whole different course than what Ken has historically taken. So yeah, it's not a direct partisan battle, but it is still a divide in Collin County for sure. Why are we not seeing other notable political figures like yourself speak out about this case?
Well, look, I'm aware of it because I've known Ken Paxton for the better part of 6 years now, and I got to know him when he was in the state legislature, running for the state senate, and then running for attorney general. So I mean, I know the measure of this man, and I suspect most national political figures probably don't have that knowledge of him. And I've sat quietly on the sidelines, trying to be supportive of him, personally. But I think it's gotten to the point now where this is obviously a miscarriage of justice. This, when you have unindicted co-conspirators as the special prosecutor against your attorney general, when you have the person who brought the charges in the first place, Byron Cook, being sued for fraud and changing the story about what he testified against about Attorney General Paxton. And then you have judges breaking the law and raping the taxpayers of hundreds of thousands of dollars. It's time to say enough.
If you have this party infight, what's the long-term damage that can come from this?
Well, I think the long-term damage is if it allows to continue. I think we can end the damage if we recognize the petty and personal nature of this and recognize that federal courts have looked at this and said there's nothing here, and that what we're seeing here is a political prosecution. That's the only way to get over this, is to recognize that we should not continue to support people who are violating Texas law, who are committing fraud, and an unindicted co-conspirator. Those are three folks that I'm not too sure we folks here in Texas are going to want to be supporting them.
Please give a warm welcome and big thanks to Ken Paxton.
Thank you all very much. Well, first of all, I appreciate the kind words. I didn't know this video was going to be done, but I appreciate what you all have done here. Also did not know Rick Santorum was going to go on TV and say that, but I can say that I've appreciated his courage to speak out and have appreciated that. And he is certainly somebody that I respect and am grateful for. So thank you all for letting me be here today. And I do want to say this. I don't think anybody's above the law, but everybody deserves the protection of the law, and that's all I've ever asked for, and that's all I'm asking for in this case. I want to talk a little bit about the view on my job now, because as you know, Donald Trump obviously is our new president, and so as it was said in my introduction, I've sued Obama a fair number of times. I think in 24 months, it was, does anybody know how many times I've sued him? I actually lost count for a while. Anybody know? It was 22 times in 24 months. As a matter of fact, I was at an event, Collin County Lincoln Day dinner. By the way, your tables are quite a deal. They're half price compared to Collin County, so I think you should buy a couple. But I had the opportunity to introduce Governor Abbott, who obviously was in office for 12 years. He had to deal with the Obama administration for 6 years, and he sued 31 times, so he was kind of gloating a little bit after I introduced him that he had actually sued more, but he did admit that I was suing faster and that I just ran out of time. So anyway, that was a great experience having him in Collin County. So I want to give you a little background on our office and what we do, because I don't think most people realize just how much is going on in our office. We obviously have a lot of different divisions. I want to cover a few of those just so you have an idea. We do have a consumer fraud division, which just finished, so actually still in the process of dealing with Volkswagen. We just got a $50 million settlement. We've got more coming. And we deal with consumer fraud all over the state. We have several offices. We issue legal opinions. We get asked all the time by legislators, especially committee chairs and state agency heads, to give them a legal opinion on different issues. And the reason we do that is we try to prevent litigation so that they can ask us a question and thereby preserve resources if we can give them an answer before they go into litigation. And we deal with several issues a month. Usually, I'm dealing with 6 to 10 of those a month. We also deal with almost 30,000 open records requests. So if cities or any kind of municipality, any kind of government has a question about whether they need to turn over information to a taxpayer, they will ask us, and we will give them opinion based on the law. So obviously in Texas, we're very much of an open government transparency state. So typically they have to have a pretty solid exception to get out of turning those over. We also have a criminal division. As was mentioned, we just prosecuted somebody for voter fraud. Obviously that's a big deal for Governor Abbott. It's a big deal for us because it's so hard to catch. And so when we catch it, we like to make sure that we prosecute it because we want to send a message that you cannot get away with this in Texas. And obviously we have other investigations going on, even in Tarrant County, as you probably already know. We have a Solicitor General's office, and some of you may be familiar with that because of Ted Cruz. He was one of the first Solicitor Generals. And that job, a lot of people don't understand exactly what that does, but that job really is about taking our cases to higher court. So oftentimes our Solicitor Generals, and we have about 25 to 30 of them, with a guy named Scott Keller who heads it up, 25 to 30 people, and they take the cases to the Texas Supreme Court. They'll take them to the Fifth Circuit. They'll take them to the U.S. Court of Appeals, and they'll take them to the Supreme Court. So we have the best top-notch Solicitor General's office in the country, which is why, and I'll get to this in a minute, why we have so many lawsuits against the federal government, because so many people count on that. We also have a special litigation division, which I started. And we started that so that we weren't just on defense with the Obama administration, we could go on offense. And so we've been trying to gear that up and hire the best and brightest that we can to head up our special litigation division. And then finally, we have a general litigation division that covers about 312 lawyers, and they deal with representing the state, all the state agencies, really almost anything you could think of, they deal with. Just so you know, we have about, anybody know how many employees are in the Attorney General's office? Any guess? 4,200 people. And over 100 offices. 62% of that, approximately, is child support. So that's a big part of what we did. I'll talk about that in a minute. But it's a big office. We have 800 lawyers. And I've been actually really impressed with the quality over the 2 years that I've been in that office, with the quality of the people that are working in my office. So let me talk about a few other things that we work. We have a law enforcement division, which has about 180 police officers. A lot of people don't realize that we deal with that. And really, we deal with 3 different types of issues. We will get asked to deal with others, but what we focus on is tracking down child predators. And we've done sting operations all over the state, really to try to stop that from happening in our state, sending the message to these child predators, this is not the state to do it in, because we're going to get you. We also have a real focus on tracking down fugitives. Sometimes we'll track down over 100 fugitives in a month. So if there's a fugitive in this room, we are going to get you. And then something that was near and dear to my heart, because I had learned a lot about it, obviously I have 3 daughters, and is human trafficking. We started a human trafficking unit at the beginning of last year with 3 attorneys and 5 investigators. Largely first with the goal of educating people about human trafficking, because people are so unaware of the signs of human trafficking and what to look for. And so if you go on our website, you'll find information about that. But also, my people are willing to go really anywhere in the state to talk about it, just to educate people. And then second, if we can't stop it, we want to make sure that we prosecute it. And so we obviously had a huge case that started in October, where we arrested the CEO of Backpage, which is a Dallas-based company. And we actually caught him coming in from the Netherlands in Houston, arrested him. 30 minutes later, we were in their offices, getting their computers and their files, and then we had him he was extradited to California. So California has their ongoing prosecution. We're still working on ours, and so those are the type of people. And if you don't know what Backpage is, the largest online purveyor that we believe, the largest online purveyor of prostitution and human trafficking, not just in Texas, but we think maybe the entire world. And so we're sending the message that we're not going to put up with human trafficking in Texas, because Texas, for the most part, on most of the good lists, we're at the top, but we're also on top of a very bad list. We're number 2 in the nation for human trafficking, and the worst city in the country is Houston. So that is a list that we don't want to be at the top of. We also have, I talked about child support, and what a big part it is for us. Texas obviously cares about collecting child support because for the custodial parent. And some of that is we certainly want to take care of our children. We also want to make sure that people don't need government assistance as a result of parents not taking care of their kids. And so it's a big effort. We have almost 1 million clients that we deal with a year. Texas is particularly good at it. We collected over $4 billion last year. The closest state, just to give an example of California, which is much larger than us, they collected $2.3 billion. And for every dollar that we spend on child support collections, we collect about $12.27. The closest to us is South Dakota, and they collect about $10.50. California collects about $2.50. So we try to continue to increase that efficiency, because it results in what we think is good public policy, helping children, and also saving the state a lot of money. And we'll continue to push to improve in that. One of the issues, I want to talk about one of the issues that we've really focused on, one that I did not expect, is religious liberty. And I did not expect that. It didn't seem like it would be something you'd see in Attorney General's office, but it started off obviously pretty quick. We were asked for an opinion by the Children's Police Department, and they asked us, could they legally put "In God We Trust" on our vehicles? And this was a relatively, I told you we do opinions, this was a relatively short opinion. It basically says, of course you can. This is the motto of our country. The official motto is "In God We Trust." It's on our coinage. And so we felt like the case law was very supportive of that. We issued the opinion. And as I've driven around the state since then, I get a huge smile when I see all these police vehicles in different counties now saying, "In God We Trust." And I think largely due to that opinion. Of course, as you know, religious liberty can be a very divisive issue. It can be very challenging. You know, it's interesting, the assault that we've had to deal with over the last several years. I simply was asked by the Lieutenant Governor to issue an opinion on whether county clerks, after the marriage decision of Obergefell, where same-sex marriage was authorized by the court, and they authorized a newly minted 14th Amendment right to same-sex marriage, we were asked by the Lieutenant Governor, well, does that eviscerate the First Amendment rights of county clerks if they don't want to marry these people, if it's against their First Amendment right or their religious views? We answered that by saying, of course they still have a First Amendment right. That can be done by somebody else in the office, and so if they have a religious objection, they should not be forced to perform that marriage. Well, we issued that opinion. The media misinterpreted what we actually said, changed the wording. I know you're shocked by this. And then I got basically a bar complaint filed by, I think it was 150 liberal lawyers. And then I had to go through this long process of a bar complaint where they were trying to punish me or take away my license. Obviously, that would be in complete violation of my First Amendment rights and my constitutional obligation to issue opinions. We finally won that, but that's typical of the way the left has dealt with these types of issues. I want to tell you about two others. One is Little Sisters of the Poor. We filed an amicus brief of that, which an amicus brief is basically a friend of the court brief to describe to the court what the law actually is. And so we filed that on behalf of 20 other states. And if you don't know the story, Little Sisters of the Poor is a group of nuns taking care of the poor. And when Obamacare came out, they were being forced by the Obama administration to change their health care plan to cover contraceptives, which is in direct violation of their religious views. And so they sued the administration. We stepped in and filed our amicus brief. And fortunately, the Supreme Court, obviously viewing this as a very touchy subject, remanded it back to the district court. And that case, I think, will be resolved favorably to these nuns, and they'll be able to continue their service without being forced to follow Obamacare. One more case that came up very, I guess in December, we found out from Killeen ISD that that there was a principal in Killeen ISD that was going to force a staff person to take down their Charlie Brown Christmas poster. I don't know if you all heard this. Because it had a scripture from Isaiah about the birth of Christ on it. Of course, this is Charlie Brown. And so we actually wrote a letter to the school board. They were about to have a meeting that night to vote on whether this principle was correct. And we told them that we would be happy to represent them if they were sued. And I want other school districts to know, if you get sued over these things, you don't have to worry about being sued or about the cost of it. We'll help you. And I wanted to send that message, and so we sent the message. So we sent that message, and the school board roundly voted 6-1 to make her take it down. We were happy to help them, and so the next day we sued them. And that afternoon, we were in court in Bell County, and when I saw the district judge come in, I know there's some judges in the room, and the district judge had a little Christmas tie on. I was pretty optimistic about how things were going to go. Kind of spoke for itself, and so by that afternoon, there were pictures taken that were sent to me by text showing this staff member putting her poster back up on the wall. So sometimes, you just got to speak up, and these religious liberty issues are important to speak up, and if you speak up, you can win, because the First Amendment was obviously something that our founders deeply cared about. That's why many of them came here, because they valued religious liberty, and despite the onslaught, we're still right on the law, and we'll still continue to fight that. I don't think that's the last case we're going to be involved in, and we're involved in some actually going on right now. So continue to watch as we fight to preserve that part of our freedom. I also want to talk finally about just some of the cases that we filed against the Obama administration, because I think it's important to understand, even as we now have a new president, what those cases meant, why they were filed, and what it means for our future, because it really will have a tremendous impact on our future, what we've already done and where we're going. So just to give you a flavor of some of the cases, and then I'll give you kind of a summary of why they're really all the same. So we filed cases against the Bureau of Land Management because they decided that they somehow, when the Red River moves, that somehow they own the property. When the Red River moves, somehow they own the landowner's property, and so the landowners sued. We sued on behalf of the state, saying the federal government's now stealing not only are they stealing the property owner's land, but they're also stealing our revenue from taxes. So that's one case that we still have going. We also have a case going on Obamacare. Everybody thought Obamacare was set. Obviously, Congress is now looking at repealing it, but Texas, along with a few other states, has a lawsuit challenging Obamacare because in the statute there is no taxation for the states, and yet Obama, through his agencies, started taxing all of the states, costing the state of Texas about $120 million a year, costing the states in general probably $2 billion a year. And so we sued on behalf of ourselves and other states to stop them from taking our money without any statutory authority to do so. By the way, I didn't finish this, but I know that people are deeply concerned about what I'm going to do now that Trump is in office and that Obama's gone, and that I can't sue the federal government. And I've had people suggest, lots of things for me to do. Maybe take an extra vacation day, maybe just take Fridays off, maybe go to California every once in a while, or maybe just get counseling. But I want you to know it's going to be okay because I still have the city of Austin to sue. And we have sued them, I think, 3 times this year. So there is plenty to do. And as you'll see, as I talk more about these cases, you'll see there's still plenty for us to focus on. So we also had many cases against the EPA. I think we've had 12, 13, 14. It's actually hard to keep track of how many we've had to file. Big cases. The Clean Power Plan, we led the way with West Virginia. 27 states sued the federal government. Think about that. 27 states sued the federal government. And it was a case that would have cost potentially the country $29 to $39 billion a year, according to some studies, would have reduced our reliability of electricity, would have taken the electricity regulation away from the states, put it at the federal government, and cost us a lot of money without any statutory authority to do it. So we are in that fight right now. We're hoping, as the new EPA administrator, by the way, was, what's that? Oh, you know him, Scott Pruitt. He was the Oklahoma Attorney General, and it's kind of nice. He actually was in my lawsuit suing the federal government. So now he's on the other side, so I'm looking forward to working with him. Do you see what an election can do? So that's the EPA. We also won just recently, really in November-ish, right after Donald Trump won the election. We had 2 very strong successes against the Department of Labor. One was called the Persuader Rule, where they had decided that if a company had a lawyer that gave them advice on unions, that now had to be disclosed to the government, and therefore the union, everything that the attorney told them. Now, that's called attorney-client privilege. And I understand it's only been around about 600 years, but the Obama administration decided in this case that the attorney-client privilege should disappear. We got a preliminary injunction in November from a judge in Sherman, Amos Mazzan, which means that basically we won. Now, that doesn't mean it's all over, but we had to show irreparable harm and likely to win on the merits, and basically he put a stop, literally the night, I think it was the night before it was supposed to go into effect, he put a stop to it. We also had a case on overtime, and actually this was the one in Sherman, where every business in America was going to have to really increase their costs and pay more overtime to almost twice as many people without any statutory direction from Congress. And so we were able to file that along with I think it was 20 states, and get that stopped. Another preliminary injunction. And then more recently, I'm sure you've heard a little bit about the bathroom cases. So that was really interesting because when we started it, nobody wanted to get involved. I couldn't get any of their AGs involved, so I started talking about it on places like CNN, MSNBC, and they kept hitting me on issues that were unrelated, and I just kept telling them, listen, this is about the Constitution. This is a president that decided to change the law without any authority from Congress to force schools in our state and across the country to allow boys and girls bathrooms, showers, locker rooms, hotel rooms, And he did it without any authority. He literally just changed the law, just changed how the statutes were worded. I don't care who you are. I don't care if you think that's a great policy. I don't care. It doesn't matter. We are going to sue you, and we are going to win. So we got another preliminary injunction, stopping that not just in Texas, not just the 13 states that filed with me, but we got a preliminary injunction across the entire nation, so no school would have to deal with this. So, and then on New Year's Eve, we got another preliminary injunction, similar issue where the Obama administration was trying to force doctors to provide, what would you call them, like sex change operations or gender reassignment surgeries, despite the fact that the doctor might object based on either their moral views or their professional medical judgment. They were still being required to do it. And so we filed another lawsuit, and the court gave us another preliminary injunction literally the night before it was going into effect. This was Christmas Eve, December 31st of 2016. We got another preliminary injunction. So you might have thought, okay, the state of Texas is done, Obama's about to be out of office, but no, we actually filed 2 more lawsuits in his last week in office just to finish things off. Yeah. So that's how we got to 22. And so what's the moral of this story? Well, the moral of this story is, despite the fact that, well, let me tell you about one more case, because it plays right into the moral of the story. The immigration case. So the immigration case was really created by President Obama over about a 6-year period, from the time he started campaigning until November-ish, November of 2014, so for 6 years. I think it was 22 times that he said, I don't have the authority to change immigration law, Congress has to do it, I am not a king, I'm not an emperor, this has to be done through the constitutional process. Despite saying that over and over, in November 2014, he came out and he said, I changed the law. Now this is a president who complained about George W. Bush issuing executive orders. Now this president is literally just changing the law. And so Governor Abbott, then General Abbott, on his way out the door in December, filed a lawsuit on this immigration issue with 26 other states, again a remarkable number, and I would complain to him that he filed it and then left me all the work, which is true. And but it was a great lawsuit, and we took that. It was I think it was my 3rd week in office. We went into court in the Southern District of Texas, and we were successful. Judge Hainan gave us another preliminary injunction, stopping the case in its tracks. Of course, the Obama administration appealed that to the 5th Circuit, and the 5th Circuit again agreed that the president didn't have the authority to change the law. And then they appealed it to the U.S. Supreme Court, and unfortunately Scalia had just passed away, and so we didn't have Scalia. But we ended up tying, which meant the 5th Circuit decision stayed in place. And I can tell you that it has been characterized often that was the Obama administration's biggest legal defeat in their entire 8 years. And that legal defeat was significant. I'll give you, y'all have heard of the Huffington Post before? Not exactly my fan, don't love me. But they wrote an article in August of 2016, something like to the effect that Texas was having a party. And they were complaining about me because we were winning, and they were complaining about the Obama administration because they were claiming that Texas had figured out how to beat the Obama administration. And that was file these lawsuits based on constitutional statutory law, recruit other states to get involved, and then go get a preliminary injunction or a stay that would stop it from going into effect. And so just the fact that the Huffington Post is probably my favorite article ever, and they were not nice to me. But they acknowledged that we had been successful. And I think that sometimes we underestimate the importance of our state and the leadership that you all vote for. I mean, Tarrant County, I would not be here but for Tarrant County. Tarrant County, when I ran in the runoff, which is significant, gave me 70% of the vote, gave me more votes than any other county in the state. You notice I haven't forgotten that. But it is significant that you put conservative leaders in place in Texas because we end up leading. Every other state, when we got that preliminary injunction in Southern District of Texas in my 3rd week, and then we took it up to the 5th Circuit and won again, and went to the U.S. Supreme Court and basically won again. Every other state saw the professionalism, the talent, and the ability and the desire for us to be successful, and that led to the momentum that we had of getting all these states as we filed lawsuit after lawsuit, everybody wanted to be part of our lawsuits. And so that force, if you think about what happened, we had a president who was ignoring what was so fundamentally important to our founders. That was separation of powers. And why did they care about the separation of powers? They cared about the separation of powers because they did not trust people in power. And so they didn't make government easy, they made it hard. And they split it up. A bunch of Presbyterians who believed in the depravity of man. It's true. And so they created 3 branches of government and divided the power. And then they also left most of the power with the states. Well, President Obama, after he lost Congress, he passed Dodd-Frank, he passed Obamacare, decided, I'm not going to deal with Congress anymore. And for 6 years, he didn't. What he did was he changed the law through agency or through executive order, just rewrote statutes, and then he had Congress sitting in the background who would not defund them, and that's really their only power to stop it. They were being stripped of their power. So were the courts. The courts had adopted something called Chevron deference. What does that mean? It means that if the agency had, or if Congress had some statute that wasn't clear and the agency interpreted it, pretty much the federal courts would just go with it. And so the courts were stepping back, Congress was stepping back, and what made the difference is the states. The states said no. If nobody else is going to fight, we're going to fight. And Texas had the resources, we had the desire, and we had the talent to go fight, and everybody knew it. And so that was the fight, Texas versus the federal government. And so your work of electing conservative leaders really did make a difference, because we were literally this close to losing what I consider our Constitution. We were almost a post-constitutional America. And despite all these successes, had we lost this election, I'm not sure we wouldn't have been there. And the reason I say that is, we have 4 justices on our immigration case that said yes. They basically acknowledged that the president changed the law, and they accepted it as okay. And so if we'd had one more justice, if the Scalia position had been held by another judge that did not believe in separation of powers, I believe we would have moved past, we would have gone to a post-constitutional America where all the power was being moved to the executive branch through agencies. Agencies would rule, and we'd all have to follow the rules without any ability to change it. And so this election, we were given a reprieve, and now we've got our opportunity. And so what we're doing in my office, I am suing Austin, but I do have a few other things to do. I still have over 20 lawsuits against the federal government, and we're going to be arguing one of them this week. And the reason they're important is there's several ways that the Trump administration can resolve these. One is they can rescind the executive orders and actions. We're hoping that for all the ones that Obama did that way, those will be undone the easiest. Second, things like Obamacare and Dodd-Frank, they're going to have to undo through Congress. And hopefully you're seeing some movement on that. And then third, all these agency actions, Department of Labor, OSHA, all this stuff that the EPA did, now that we have Scott Pruitt and an administration that understands the balance between keeping our water and air clean, but also understands that we need to be reasonable and rational as we deal with that, hopefully they'll go back and change these agency actions and undo them. But that doesn't solve our problem for good. Because what happens when these people are out of office? We could be right back in the same situation. So we need to pass laws. Congress needs to pass something that confines these agencies so that there is a review by Congress. And I know that John Ratcliffe has a bill that relates to court review, because the courts have basically stepped back. He has a bill that would require agency action. If you sue them, the courts would have to give what's called de novo review. And what does that mean? That means that they would have to treat it as an initial action. In other words, they couldn't just have this deference based on, it's confusing. They would have to look at each thing that the agency did as an original action and treat it and look at it under the law, so that the courts can undo it. But we also need something for Congress to go back and make sure that if we ever end up in the situation where we don't have a good court and we don't have the administration, we've got the law in place that will allow Congress to stop these types of actions. So there is plenty to do, and there's plenty to work on. In the next 4 years, we can't afford to waste a day. We've got to use every moment to undo and stop what this administration has put in place over the last 8 years. But I can say this, I do believe that it's amazing, it's a miracle that we ended up in this situation. We had a chance. And so I would encourage you as an important county in our state, which means that you're important to the nation, to stay involved and to stay on our legislators in Congress to fix this, because they are in a unique position. And when I went to the inauguration a couple of weeks ago, I encouraged them, do not waste time. There are high expectations. You all need to get things done. You need to put this in place that this cannot happen again. And I hope they've gotten the message that we are draining the swamp. But we're also protecting our future for us and for our children. So thank you all for the opportunity to speak. I'm happy to answer questions. I know I didn't go over my time, so I've got time for questions about whatever you want to ask about.
So if you still want to do a question, Mary's wandering around with cards and she'll get them up here. Mike Oakley is going to read the questions for us.
Howdy. This week, the Pew Research released data on estimates of illegal aliens living in the United States. They estimate that there's about 500,000 illegal aliens living in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Given the massive number of foreign aliens occupying our state, violating our laws, rebelling against our governments, many would say this ongoing conspiracy by the aliens and their respective governments constitutes an invasion. What are your thoughts on an interstate compact led by Texas to enforce federal immigration?
You know, I think it's a great idea. I also think that what President Trump is talking about with his executive action or order that talks about a wall, building a wall, talks about more border security agents, talks about more immigration agents, talks about deporting people that have committed crimes. I think it is definitely a step in the right direction. You can see how much controversy it's causing. And then his travel ban, which, by the way, was struck down by the Ninth Circuit, which is the most liberal circuit in the country. And they absolutely got the law wrong. And I want you to know, one of the nice things is it's nice to be on the other side where we can actually be proactive in arguing for what our federal government is doing. And you'll see Texas being aggressive on the other side, challenging states like Washington and Minnesota who have said that this is not something that the president can do. But what this Ninth Circuit failed to do was actually, they failed to lay out what the law actually is. They left out the provisions that allow the president to specifically do this travel ban. They ignored it. They never covered it in their opinion, nor did the district court, and we're going to bring that to light. And so you're going to see us very engaged in this process. Because look, this is the type, it's kind of interesting that Washington and Minnesota sued using the strategy that Texas has been using for the last 8 years, or the last 6 years. And the problem is they failed to cite the law. And so if they fail to cite the law, we're going to step in and say what the law is and defend the administration going forward as long as the administration is following the law. And in this case, the president has absolute authority to do what he is intending to do.
What can the 2017 legislature do to help with fines for signs? And I assume we're talking about 30-06s and 30-07s posted in government buildings. That's my interpretation.
Okay, that sounds like a good interpretation.
And
I can't talk about this.
And the governments who continue to ban license to carry.
So our office was given responsibility last session to basically enforce the law, which we had a lot of cities, and actually this is kind of interesting. I complained about this on the campaign trail, about how cities and municipalities were banning CHL holders from carrying in government buildings, and to me it seemed like that was going outside of the law. Well, I complained about it so much that I complained about it in Donna Campbell's district. She's a senator from the New Braunfels area, and she went and filed that legislation about telling me, putting it in the hands of the Attorney General to go enforce it. So I didn't know it until it passed, pretty much, that she had done that, but she got the idea from my complaints, but just didn't tell me she was going to get it done, and she got it done. So the challenge was that there's some definitions that need to be tightened up about what a courthouse is, so there's a little interpretation. But we worked with most cities and counties. We would go down and look at their courthouse, because it was some of these courthouses are in there's other buildings around, so it's not just the courthouse. And so we would actually go and try to work with them and try to interpret it the best we could based on how the legislature drafted it. So for the most part, most cities complied, and we were able to work out the protection for the courthouse, because you can't carry weapons in a courthouse. We did have a problem with a few counties, and one of them might have been Travis, and we sued them. And we also sued Waller County. So that's just one of the many lawsuits that we sued Travis. They had no interest in our help and no interest in following the law. And so, we were just as happy to go sue Travis County, and I'm pretty sure we'll beat them.
Excellent, and I'm an LTC instructor. I can tell you, we get a lot of questions on that. When we call DPS, we get a massive shoulder shrug, so that's a great answer. Okay, on the grandparents page, I assume this is on your website, you mentioned that grandparents play an important role in their grandchildren's lives. Yet in Texas, grandparents' visitation rights and grandchildren's rights to see the grandparents they love are virtually non-existent. What legislative recommendation can you suggest, and what actions can you take to help secure these rights as we seek to keep our grandchildren?
Well, that is obviously a legislative issue. It's very tricky. A little, you've got the balance between the parents who are, fundamentally responsible for taking care of their children, and then you have some interest of the grandparents. I don't know exactly what the right answer is. I know that, we always wanted our grandparents around, or my parents and her parents, but that is a policy issue that has to be, if it's going to be addressed, has to be addressed by the legislature. My office would not really have any say other than if they look to us to provide help on drafting it in a way that would work and make sure that it was constitutional.
Excellent. And I'm going to combine two here. Basically, you're in a room full of friends, right? So please share with us a condensed Reader's Digest version. So an elevator ride where we're on an elevator with somebody that's asking about your case, and how can we, in 30 seconds or less, convince them that it's a witch hunt?
Wow, 30 seconds. So much has happened. So I guess the way to begin this is there's a federal case and a state case, and they're basically the same. It's pretty much the same law, same witnesses, Byron Cook and his buddy, same issues. And so I'm much safer talking about the federal case because the federal judge has put no restrictions on me for talking about it. I had a little more challenge in Tarrant County because there have been some restrictions put on me talking about my case. But the civil case I can talk about, just so you know, they're virtually the same. So I'll talk about the civil case. So just to give you an idea of and I think Santorum covered it well, these charges, they filed 4 charges against me, and I asked my attorney, he's a former enforcement attorney for the SEC. Not only was he was actually in charge of the entire division for the entire nation, and so the group that's coming after me out of Washington, he was over. And when we responded to these 4 charges, in the very first sentence, we mentioned that it was Byron Cook, and we also mentioned the fact that no one had lost money, and there were no victims. No one had lost money, and no one had been lied to. And I asked my attorney, I said, have you ever had a case where you could say no one had been lied to and no one lost money? And he said, never. And I said, well, then how can they bring this case against me? He said, how many times have you sued Obama? And I said, 13. And he said, well, they're suing you back. It literally happened the week before the immigration case. And so we went into court in Sherman September 2nd, and we filed 4 motions to dismiss. And as Santorum said it right, we had to accept every false thing that Byron said, every false thing that the SEC said as true. And my attorney said, you're still going to win on the law. Even if everything they said is true, you still haven't done anything wrong. And so we went in and argued, and the judge specifically said, I don't ever grant these, because it's almost impossible to win under that standard. And so he asked my attorney a bunch of hard questions. I was kind of bummed that he said he never granted them, because I spent a lot of money to get guys there from DC to come argue on my behalf. So my attorney did a great job, and then he turned to the SEC and he said, under what law are you doing this? Because if you want him to go through trial, I have to have something to rely on. He said, what law are you relying on? So they went through their brief, which they had already presented in writing, and after they were done, the judge said, none of these laws apply. Those are all bribery cases. You're not alleging any of that. You have to give me some law. And so they said, well, Your Honor, we have one case. So they walked up, handed it to him. He looked at it, And he said, 1935 New York, that's your one case. He said, that's not even precedent. He said, you're asking me to create a whole new rule, and this will apply to everybody in the country. And then the SEC basically said, no, we just want a rule for this case. And he said, square peg, round hole. And he dismissed all four. So these, yeah. So the SEC it was really humiliating. It was awkward to be there watching how badly they did, because they couldn't answer any questions. The judges dismantled him, and he's a very nice man. So they have the right by law to refile. Well, they refiled with a whole new theory, that Byron Cook had a new theory, and so the judges said that there has to be an express policy, and he was claiming now an investment proof. And so that's how they filed their new theory. The problem is, when Byron got sued for fraud recently, he and Joel both, the two witnesses in both cases, got sued for fraud. They couldn't stick to the story because it would implicate them in their own case, and so they've stepped back and they've changed their story again. So, I don't really know what the story is anymore. We'll see what it is at trial. The fortunate part for me is that the standard for a civil case is much lower than a standard for the criminal case, and I've got a judge on the civil side that is actually addressing the law. My challenge on the state side all the way through the process is I've never been able to get a judge to rule on the law. And so the jury is going to be stuck answering questions about securities law that are questions of law, I think. They're going to have to figure out what the securities laws are, because nobody else in the state, we've taken it all the way up to the Court of Appeals, no one will answer that question. But the fact that it's done so well in the civil case tells you everything you need to know about the state case. It's just we have a different structure, we have different people in those roles, and they've handled it completely differently. So the civil case has been something I can talk about, and it compares very directly to what's going on in my state case, except the civil case has gone a lot better because I've gotten rulings as opposed to no rulings. That's not really 30 seconds.
I was about to say, that's a really slow elevator, very tall building. Okay, here's a combination of two. Why can't we arrest mayors and city officials who continue to operate their cities as sanctuary cities?
So that question is interesting because the Texas Senate, actually Governor Abbott called an emergency item in place for sanctuary cities, and so the Senate just passed it out last week overwhelmingly, and one of the provisions in there was that if you're an elected official and you're not following the law, you can suffer some type of criminal penalty. And so that actually, if the House does it, would be law. We just don't know yet whether the House can get that through, because obviously the Senate tends to get this stuff through more quickly than the House, and who knows what's going to happen over there. But that right now is teed up for the House, and if they pass it, the governor signs it.
Okay, sir, how is the Convention of States regarding term limits going?
So the Convention of States, if I remember this right, it requires for 34 states, is that right, to call for the Constitutional Convention. I think we're at like 7 or 8. We're not close yet. So it's going to take a lot more states. I know that Governor Abbott has put that as another emergency item. So he wants Texas to be one of the, I guess the 9th state to do that. But obviously there's a lot of work to do in the states, and I know it's up in a lot of states this time. So we'll see if we make progress on that.
Okay, and what is your official website address? www.texasattorneygeneral.gov.
And for him personally, it's www.kenpaxton.com, and you can go find us on Twitter.
Can you do that one more time slower?
Kenpaxton.com, www.kenpaxton.com. You can find us on Twitter and Facebook as well. There's a lot of good information.
Thank you.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry, somebody thinks I read Egyptian. Where are we on mixed gender bathrooms, Target, TJ, Maxx?
Okay, so I can make something of that.
Outstanding.
So we have our own lawsuit against the federal government that we've stopped it from going into effect, that whole having to have boys and girls bathrooms. But now the Texas legislature, particularly the Senate, is taking that up. Dan Patrick has made that a key item. I don't anticipate necessarily that the House is going to be as excited about it, because different leadership up there. But I think there's a decent chance you'll see legislation protecting, and it's very interesting because you see all these businesses like Texas Association of Business coming out against it. It doesn't affect businesses. It doesn't affect businesses. Businesses can, under this legislation, can do whatever they want to do. They suffer the consequences one way or the other, so if they're not providing the right kind of security and protection for our children, and for women, they're going to suffer their own consequences. Look at what happens with Target. Their stock value is down significantly because they made that decision. That's up to them. This legislation deals with schools and public entities, public, government. And it basically just says, that it's going to be based on biological sex. So I don't know why these businesses are screaming bloody murder, because it doesn't affect them. They're confusing the issue. They either don't understand it or they want to confuse the issue, but it doesn't relate to any business. So when you hear these businesses threatening, the bill that Governor Patrick and Lois Course are putting forward doesn't affect them at all. It's just the media misguiding you. It's just not true.
Okay, here's a twofer related question. What percentage of our state government comes from the federal government and state budget, I'm sorry, thank you. And can we live without it? And then as a follow-on, how much money does your agency receive in Title D dollars for forcing parents that lost kids due to corruption by courts?
Okay.
I think that might be an editorial.
The answer is we get a lot of money from the federal government. I don't know the exact percentage, but obviously it's a large amount of money, and obviously there's a lot of strings attached to it. My office, a lot of our child support money, 2/3 of our child support money comes from the federal government. So, we're dealing with that on a constant basis. They have their own rules that you have to follow to get the money, but those have been in place for a long time. Whether you would want to walk away from, I don't know what percentage, 30, 40% of our budget coming from federal government, I'm guessing, but it's a lot. And that's one of the reasons when I was in the Senate, I fought to stop the expansion of Medicaid. They were promising to give us 100% or 90% of the money. And my argument was, yeah, that's what they say now, but here's the reality. They're going to make us expand to cover all these new people. And guess what? We can't stop the federal government from stepping away from their responsibility later and leaving us with the bill. And so I spent my whole last session looking at every little tricky bill, trying to sneak that in. The Democrats had it in all kinds of different bills, and I stopped it probably 15 or 20 times because I didn't think that was a good position for us to be in. So I'm not a big fan of relying on federal government. I don't know. It's very difficult to wean yourself from literally billions of dollars once you've got people relying on it.
Okay, thank you, sir. What do you think about President Trump's failure to sign his own religious liberties executive order at the urging of Economic Council, Mr. Cohen, Jared Kushner, and Ivanka Trump? Second part, is this fear an LGBT backlash or strategic planning to get Gorsuch judge worship confirmed first?
Look, I don't know the answer to that question because we've just started, and there's so much that has to be dealt with from the Obama administration. I can tell you that our contacts are starting to develop, and they're good contacts. Obviously Governor Perry's a good contact, Scott Pruitt's a good contact, Tillerson is going to be a good contact, and I really feel like as I've watched him make these appointments, I mean, he's done a pretty good job. I can't think of a president since Reagan that's done as good a job of appointing conservatives. And so I'm optimistic that even though everything doesn't happen in one day, I mean, he seems like he's kicked it into gear pretty fast, and he's pushing. And I'm right now just kind of getting the beginning stages of talking to somebody in the Department of Justice, because Sessions just got appointed on Wednesday. It's hard to expect him to be totally up to speed on every one of our cases, in a week. And so we're building those relationships, and we're hopeful that this is going to be, a great administration. I'm not pessimistic at all. We'll just have to see how it plays out, but so far, so good.
Thank you, sir. Okay, conservatives in Tarrant County have been fighting the Obama boondoggle known as text rail. We discovered language in the transportation code requiring text rail to get permission from every city it passes through. At first, text rail denied this. Then they said they already had permission. Our city, Colleyville, has taken an official stance opposing the rail. Is there anything your office can do to help us? And it says, thanks.
Look, this was an issue that I fought almost every session. I was not a fan of rail. And you know, I came into office, I didn't have an opinion. And so I had Plano, which I wasn't representing yet, but I ended up representing them in the Senate. And then my cities, McKinney, Allen, Frisco, Prosperous Line, did not have rail. And all my chambers were pushing for rail, so I did some research. And then I realized that there wasn't a place in America other than maybe San Francisco where it actually made economic sense, that it was going to cost more than it was worth. And there are other ways to spend your transportation dollars. And so I literally spent one whole session fighting this thing called TILATA that one of your state reps up here, Vicki Truitt, was pushing. And I spent my whole session trying to kill that because it was going to cost you all a lot of money, including you're going to have to pay taxes on every mile you drove. And then there were like 6 other taxes. It was going to go into this fund that wasn't even elected officials. It was going to be appointed by elected officials, but you know, it was going to be all hidden from the taxpayers. Cost billions of dollars and provide no benefit. And ultimately, I ended up in the Senate representing a city, Plano, that asked me to help them force McKinney, Allen, and Prosper into rail because they're spending their 1 cent on rail, and McKinney, Allen, and Frisco are spending it on economic development, and they didn't think that was fair, even though they had voted for it. So I went back to them and said, do you know how much you're spending on every rider that you're paying for? And they said, what do you mean? I said, well, how much per year, how much are you spending on every rider? And they said, I don't know. And I said, well, here's the answer. You're spending almost $250,000 per rider per year. If you'll just stop doing that, you can buy them all a car and a driver, and you'll save a lot of money. They did not know they were spending that much money. But if you took the total amount, how many riders there were, and guess what? They didn't want to give it up because they're all politically aligned. It's all politics. But my cities have now, the cities that I represented before, had figured out that is not a system they want to be in because it's really expensive and there's no way to justify it for the taxpayers. It's just politics. So I would say you're going to have to keep fighting that in the legislature. I fought it every session and I stopped it every session. But there's a lot of forces that want that money spent and want you all sucked into that process. But let me just tell you, I've done the research. It doesn't pay for itself. It's not cost efficient anywhere. It all sounds good. All these cities, you know, want to make it sound good. But it doesn't work.
Amen. Tarrant County has the highest rate of child abuse, I did not know this, in the state. When will the family court here be audited? And then the follow-on, can anything be done to hold people with impunity accountable for dishonesty?
So we don't do the audits, and that would be a legislative function. If there's something more that needs to be done to hold people accountable, that would go through the legislature. A lot of times people want my office to do things that we don't have the authority to do, and I've spent a lot of my career fighting government that is doing things that they're not supposed to do under their own authority. And so we stay away from doing things that are policy related or things that other branches of government are supposed to do. And one of the first things I did when I came into office was I asked for the memo on, okay, what is our authority under the law? What are we supposed to be doing? Well, there was no memo. So I was like, well, how does anybody know what they're supposed to be doing if there's nothing guiding us? And so I had them do the research. There's over 1,000 statutes dealing with my office, plus the Constitution. I had them go through every one of them and try to figure out, are we doing what we're supposed to be doing? And it turns out there were a few things that we were doing where we shouldn't be doing. And so guess what? We cut them out and save the taxpayers money. So, you know, my job is to follow my authority. And a lot of times people want me to do things that other branches of government. And one of those things is I can't change the law. That's the legislature. I can help them. I can give them guidance, but it's up to them to change the law.
Okay, this is a combination of 2 questions as well. Original jurisdiction of U.S. court suits between states. New York violates the rights of Texans to carry a handgun when they visit New York. And your answer to that is going to be nothing you can do about it. But.
Right. I mean, it'd be difficult for me. I mean, the challenge we have in a case like that would be whether we would have standing I'll give you an example. We filed, one of our last lawsuits against the federal government was on the internet, transfer the internet. Transfer the internet was, to me, I still can't figure out why we did it. It's worth, trillions of dollars. And we transferred it to a private nonprofit with a board that has an international board from all over the world. We did it for nothing. We gave it away. Congress should have filed a lawsuit. They didn't. So at the last minute, Texas filed a lawsuit along with Arizona and Nevada. We went into federal court down in Galveston, and we lost. Not because we didn't have a good case, not because we're not going to be harmed in the future, but we couldn't demonstrate harm today. And so the internet got transferred. Congress let it happen. I don't understand why, and I don't understand what benefit we got, but I don't think it was nothing. It was just a loss. But the issue we have a challenge with sometimes on these cases is can we show harm to the state? And we don't get to necessarily step into the shoes of individuals that are suffering harm, even though we'd like to sometimes.
Okay, we have 5 minutes. If you're concerned with child trafficking, which obviously you are, do you consider parental kidnapping a part of this? And if so, why are fathers not prosecuted?
That's a complicated question that depends on the family situation, whether obviously divorce affects relationships, and that ends up being covered by consent decrees and orders that are negotiated among the parties or ordered by the judge. So that one's hard to answer because I don't really know what situation is being addressed here.
Okay, I think this is probably going to be the last one because we're about to get the hook here. Oh, boss says one more after this. The time has come for Dallas, both city and county government, to be investigated for systematic abuses of citizens' rights by the DPD violating 1st, 5th, 13th, and 14th Amendment rights, and complaints to, it says here, IAD are ignored, Internal Affairs, are ignored and obstructed, obfuscated. It's either obfuscated or obstructed.
So one of the challenges we have in my office is we don't have a lot of original jurisdiction in any kind of criminal case. So we're mostly a civil law firm. We deal with criminal cases when we get referred those cases by DAs. Unless it's an election fraud issue, the DAs have been very guarded about transferring any of their power or even giving concurrent jurisdiction. And so one of the frustrations, this is particularly true in South Texas, some of my friends in South Texas legislators have complained about the corruption because the local DAs are sometimes involved, and so they won't pursue the people that they should pursue because they're also elected by them. And so the DAs Association has guarded that. It would be nice to have some concurrent jurisdiction in the AG's office to go after it if, say, a DA won't. And this is one of those cases. There may be corruption, there may be a lot of corruption. We may know it, and a DA may know it. The DA can ignore it, and there's no accountability for that. There's no one overseeing DAs. They have absolute control over what gets prosecuted. And if they actually prosecute somebody illegally, there's very little that you can do because once they get the indictment, I know this from my own case, once they get the indictment, they could have lied to the grand jury. You won't know it because it's all secret. That's designed to protect the innocent, supposedly. But there's no recording of it necessarily. You don't get to defend yourself. They can lie. And once they get the indictment, you're stuck. And so there's a lot of power in the DAs that I think deserves some check, at least some other accountability, but we don't have it in Texas, and the DAs have argued hard and long that they should not have that accountability.
Thank you, sir. And this is the last one. Did I mention I'm just reading these? I mentioned that, right?
You're fusing some.
Yeah. Now that we are in power, why don't we start frivolously prosecuting Democrats like they do us?
Because we're better than that. I'll say one more thing about that. Sometimes I've argued we actually are held to a higher standard because it's a standard we hold ourselves to. And other people have an advantage because they may not be limited by the truth, the law, or decency. And we are. And so we have to be smarter, we have to work harder, we have to be better, we have to pray more. Because we are held to a higher standard by ourselves, by our friends. They have an advantage. They don't necessarily have to be held to that standard. And some of the people that are involved in my case, they're not held to that standard. But we are, and we're better for it. Thank you all very much.